The first time my mother humiliated me in front of the entire family that Thanksgiving, the turkey was still steaming, and the cranberry sauce hadn't even been passed yet. We were gathered around the long oak table in Savannah, the one that always made the room feel smaller, and my mistakes feel larger. My brother Mark sat at the head beside my father, already loosening his tie, like a man who believed he owned the air. My sister Lily leaned close to my mother, smiling softly, playing the part she had perfected since childhood. And then there was me, Claire Donovan, 31 years old, seated at the far end, like an afterthought no one had bothered to remove. Patricia Donovan cleared her throat. That sound alone had trained my spine to stiffen over decades. She dabbed her lips with a napkin and smiled the public version of her smile, the one she used when she wanted to sound generous while cutting someone open. "I just want to say how proud I am of Mark," she said, turning toward him. "After everything we've invested in you, it's wonderful to see you finally stepping into your future." Mark grinned, lifting his glass. "Couldn't have done it without you, Mom." My father chuckled, approving, while Lily nodded enthusiastically. No one looked at me. "And Lily," my mother continued, "you've been such a help this year, planning the wedding, keeping the family together. You have such a good heart." Lily reached for her hand. "I just do what I can." Then my mother's gaze shifted, finally landing on me. The room went quiet in that subtle way families learn the way they do when blood is about to be spilled politely. "And Claire," she said, voice light, almost amused, "well, we're all still waiting for you to figure out what you want to do with your life." A few nervous laughs followed. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "I have a career," I said evenly, "you know that." My mother tilted her head. "A job, dear, not a life. You're always working but never really building anything. No home, no family, just spreadsheets." Mark snorted. Lily avoided my eyes. Something hot rose in my chest, but I swallowed it. I had learned long ago that reacting only fed her. "Well," my mother added, as if remembering something amusing, "at least we know who we can rely on not to complicate things." "What do you mean?" I asked. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing. Just that some people are meant to support from the sidelines." The words settled over the table like dust. Support. Sidelines. That familiar script. My grandmother's empty chair sat across from me. She had died 3 years earlier, quietly, without ceremony, and yet her absence still pressed on the room harder than any living person. She had been the only one who ever watched me closely, really watched, as if she were cataloging truths the rest of them preferred to ignore. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Football chatter, wedding plans, Mark's vague talk of expanding the family business. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. After dessert, while Lily cleared plates and my father poured brandy, my mother stood and tapped her glass. "One more thing," she said, "since we're all together." My stomach tightened. "With Mark's wedding coming up," she continued, "your father and I thought it was time to finalize some long overdue decisions about the future, about legacy." Mark straightened. Lily's eyes sparkled. "We met with the lawyer last week," my mother said. "Everything is settled now. Clean, fair." I felt the room lean forward. "Of course," she added, looking directly at me, "not everyone needs to be involved in those details." My pulse thudded in my ears. "What details?" She smiled thinly. "Oh, Claire, you don't need to worry about the will." The word landed hard. Will. My father shifted uncomfortably. Mark avoided my gaze. Lily's smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "I think I should worry," I said quietly, "considering I've handled compliance for the company for years." My mother laughed sharp and quick. "That's just paperwork. This is family." The hypocrisy was almost impressive. I pushed my chair back and stood, every instinct screaming to leave before I said something unforgivable. "I need some air." No one stopped me. Outside, the Georgia evening was thick and warm. Cicadas hummed. I walked to the edge of the yard and stared at the dark river beyond the trees, my thoughts racing. Excluded. That was the word, forming ugly and undeniable. Behind me, the door creaked open. My father stepped out. "Your mother didn't mean it the way it sounded." "She said the will is settled," I replied, "without me." He sighed. "It's complicated." "It always is," I said. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Your grandmother wanted things handled carefully." My breath caught. "What did she want?" He looked away. "That's not my place to say." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different now, hostile in a quiet, patient way. Around 2 a.m, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure server I still had access to. The company files loaded slowly, folders I knew better than my own reflection. That was when I saw it. A recently updated estate planning file timestamped just days earlier. I clicked it. and realized with chilling clarity that I had been erased. I didn't cry when I saw my name missing from the document. That surprised me. I had expected anger, devastation, maybe even relief. Instead, what I felt was a deep, unnerving calm, the kind that comes when a long-suspected truth finally stops pretending. The estate plan was meticulous. Pages of distributions, contingencies, trusts. Mark received controlling interest in the logistics company. Lily was assigned income from the riverfront properties. My parents secured lifetime authority over everything until transfer. My name appeared only once buried in a clause assigning me responsibility for regulatory compliance until transition was complete. Responsible not included. I closed the file and leaned back, staring at the ceiling fans spinning slowly above me. The house was silent, but my thoughts were not. Memories surfaced uninvited, each one sharp enough to draw blood. I remembered being 22, fresh out of college, flying home at my own expense because the company had failed a safety audit. Mark had shrugged it off, said it wasn't his problem. Lily had cried about stress. My parents had looked at me. "You're good with details," my mother had said. "Fix it." And I had, quietly, efficiently, without credit. I remembered Christmas mornings when Mark opened expensive gifts and Lily received something sentimental while I got practical items. Notebooks, file organizers, things meant to keep me useful. Back then, I had mistaken usefulness for love. By morning, the house buzzed with activity. Wedding calls, brunch plans. My mother moved through the kitchen like a general issuing orders. When she saw me, her expression tightened. "You're up early," she said. "So were you," I replied. She poured coffee, avoiding my eyes. "I hope last night didn't upset you." "I saw the will," I said. Her hand froze mid-pour. "You had no right," she snapped. "I had access," I said calmly, "because you gave it to me." She set the pot down hard. "That was for work, not snooping." "You removed me," I said. "Completely." Her shoulders squared. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" I asked, because it looks deliberate. She sighed as if I were a stubborn child. "Claire, you're independent. You don't need inheritance the way Mark and Lily do." There it was, the justification she had rehearsed. "So I get responsibility instead," I said. "Liability, risk." "You get purpose," she replied sharply. Purpose, another word they used like a leash. My father entered then, tension etched into his face. "Let's not do this today." When I asked, "After the wedding, after the company collapses," my mother's eyes flashed. "Watch your tone." "I'm watching the pattern," I said. Silence stretched between us, thick and brittle. Later that afternoon, I drove back to my apartment, the city blurring past as my mind worked relentlessly. Anger would come later, I knew. For now, clarity ruled. They believed they had sidelined me. They were wrong. That evening, I called Rachel, the attorney I had worked with professionally on compliance cases. She listened carefully as I explained her questions, precise, her pauses thoughtful. "They excluded you from inheritance," she said, "but kept you operationally embedded." "Yes," I replied. "That's not an accident," she said. "That's leverage." "On them or on me?" I asked. "Depends on what you do next," she answered. After we hung up, I opened my files again. Years of reports, audit logs, emails. I began noticing patterns I had once smoothed over. Irregularities, deferred filings, decisions made without documentation. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Mom says you're upset over nothing. Please don't ruin Mark's wedding." I stared at the screen, then set the phone face down. I wasn't going to ruin anything. I was going to let the truth do it for me. And somewhere deep in the system, I knew better than anyone else, something dangerous was already waking up. The first formal notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between routine emails and automated reports, disguised well enough that anyone else would have deleted it without reading past the subject line. I almost did the same. Almost. Years of compliance work had trained my eyes to catch small irregularities, the kinds of details that mattered only after it was too late. Request for documentation review. Internal governance and regulatory alignment. The sender was a junior associate at an external consulting firm my parents occasionally used when they wanted reassurance without real oversight. The language was polite, vague, careful. But the attachment list was specific. Too specific. They wanted records from the last 7 years. Decision logs, approval chains, compliance sign-offs. The exact period when I had quietly become the spine holding everything upright. I closed my office door and read the email again, slower this time. Someone had opened a door. I leaned back in my chair and let memory do what it did best when given silence. I remembered my grandmother sitting at this same desk once years ago when I still lived at home. She had watched me work, the way I cross-referenced documents, the way I never assumed anything was harmless just because it was familiar. "You see what others don't," she had said. "That can make you dangerous or invaluable." At the time, I hadn't understood the warning. Now I did. I forwarded the email to Rachel without comment. She called within minutes. "They're nervous," she said. "Someone's anticipating exposure." "My mother," I replied. Likely Rachel agreed. People don't tighten records unless they're afraid of what's loose. That afternoon, my father called. "Your mother says you've been distant," he said carefully. "I've been observant," I replied. He sighed. "She thinks you're punishing her." "I'm protecting myself," I said. There was a pause. "That sounds the same to her." "It isn't," I said quietly. After we hung up, I pulled up the master compliance tracker, the one I had maintained for years, the one no one else understood. I began reviewing it not as a caretaker, but as an auditor. The difference was unsettling. Decisions that had once felt reasonable now looked reckless. Expenses approved verbally. Delays justified emotionally. Risk accepted because family asked nicely. I hadn't broken rules. I had bent them. To keep things running, to keep peace, to keep my place. By evening, my jaw ached from clenching it all day. I drove home through Savannah's narrow streets, the historic charm suddenly feeling like a facade stretched thin over rot. At my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and opened my personal journal, something I hadn't touched in months. Page after page was filled with lists of obligations, reminders, warnings to myself not to forget what others depended on me for. There was nothing about what I wanted. My phone buzzed again. "Mark, Mom says you're being weird," he said without greeting. "This is a stressful time. Don't make it about you." I laughed once softly. "It's always been about you." He bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I said you don't even know what you've been protected from." He scoffed. "You think you're so important." I closed my eyes. "I think you're about to find out how fragile things are without me smoothing them over." He hung up. Later that night, I received a second email, this one from a regulatory body I recognized immediately. A preliminary inquiry. Narrow in scope, targeted. The timeline matched the wedding. They were trying to clean house before the guests arrived. I didn't interfere. I complied. And in doing so, I stopped shielding them from the consequences of their own choices. For the first time, I let the system see exactly what I had been holding back. The wedding planning accelerated, as if speed alone could outrun reality. Emails flew, deposits were made, invitations sent. Lily became unbearable in her performance of fragility, sighing loudly about stress while delegating everything to everyone else, especially me. "You're so organized," she said sweetly over the phone. "Could you just look over the vendor contracts? Make sure everything's fine?" "No," I replied. She went silent. "You always help." "Not this time," I said. She tried guilt next. "Mom's counting on you." "That's the problem," I replied and ended the call. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. She stood in the doorway like she owned it, eyes scanning the space, cataloging what she could criticize. "You've changed," she said. "I've stopped pretending," I replied. She folded her arms. "This attitude will cost you your family." I met her gaze. "You already decided what I cost." Her lips pressed thin. "If you'd just cooperate, this would all blow over." "Blow over for who?" I asked. "For all of us," she snapped. I shook my head. "For you." She stared at me, really stared, as if seeing me clearly for the first time unsettled her. "You think you're untouchable," she said. "I think you underestimated me," I replied. She left without another word. That evening, Rachel called again. "They've escalated," she said. "Formal audit request. Broader scope." I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. "What does that mean?" "It means things are about to get uncomfortable," she replied. "And public." The next week unfolded like a slow collapse. Requests multiplied. Meetings were scheduled. My parents scrambled, suddenly aware of how much knowledge they didn't possess. They called me constantly. I didn't answer. The day before the wedding rehearsal, Mark showed up at my door, his confidence finally cracked. "They're asking questions," he said, "about approvals, about compliance." "Yes," I replied. "You need to fix this," he said. "I already did," I said. "Years ago. You just didn't notice." He swallowed. "What do you want?" I looked at him, really looked at the man who had been handed everything and still managed to squander stability. "I want you to understand, I said that you don't get to erase me and keep my protection." His face went pale. "You can still help," he whispered. "I am helping," I replied, "just not you." That night, as Savannah glowed with wedding lights and anticipation, I sat alone on my balcony, the air thick with jasmine and consequence. They thought the ceremony was the beginning. They were wrong. It was the countdown. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restored warehouse overlooking the river, all exposed brick and soft lighting, meant to suggest warmth without substance. I arrived late on purpose, slipping into a chair near the back while conversations hummed around me. No one noticed at first. They rarely did when I stopped performing availability. When my mother finally saw me, her smile tightened the way it always did when she realized control had slipped beyond reach. Mark stood at the center of the room, glass, raised voice loud, with forced confidence. He talked about family, about legacy, about how grateful he was for support. The words sounded rehearsed, borrowed from speeches he had heard but never earned. Applause followed. I didn't clap. I watched faces instead. I watched who avoided my eyes and who studied me too closely. After dinner, Lily cornered me near the bar. Her eyes were bright, too bright, her smile brittle at the edges. "You came?" she said, like she hadn't expected me to exist at all. "I was invited," I replied. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Mom says you're upset." "I'm clear," I said. "There's a difference." She frowned. "This isn't the time to make statements." "I'm not," I said. "I'm letting actions speak." Her expression flickered, then hardened. "You're being selfish." I smiled faintly. "You should hear how that sounds." She turned away without responding. Later, my father approached me, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. "Things are tense," he said unnecessarily. "They always are when truth is nearby," I replied. He glanced around nervously. "Your mother's afraid." I looked at him steadily. She should be. He winced, but didn't argue. That night, after the dinner ended and guests drifted away, my phone buzzed with a notification from the regulatory portal. Another request, broader than before. They wanted records tied directly to executive decisions, not just compliance summaries. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her response came quickly. "They're moving faster than expected." "Because the wedding is tomorrow," I replied. "Yes," she said. "And because someone tried to preempt them." I stared at the screen. "Who?" "Your mother," she said. "She contacted them." The air felt suddenly thin. "Why?" "To control the narrative," Rachel replied. She framed it as proactive transparency. I laughed softly. She never learns. "No," Rachel said. "She escalates." The next morning, Savannah woke wrapped in mist, the river barely visible from the hotel window. The wedding preparations began early. Hair appointments, makeup artists, florists rushing through lobbies with armfuls of white. I didn't attend any of it. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, documents spread across the screen like a map. I wasn't hunting for revenge. I was following a trail. One decision led to another, each small compromise stacking quietly until the structure depended entirely on my discretion. At 10:30, Rachel called. "They've issued a notice of intent," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For a formal investigation," she replied. "Effective immediately." I closed my eyes. "This doesn't stop the wedding," she added, "but it casts a shadow." I pictured my mother flawless in her tailored dress greeting guests with that practiced smile, believing she still controlled the day. She didn't know yet that control had already shifted. At noon, Mark called me, voice shaking. "What did you do?" I answered questions I said. "You always do this," he snapped. "You hide behind rules." "No," I replied calmly. "I hid you from them." He was silent. "You don't get to exclude me and keep my silence," I continued. "You chose that." He hung up. I watched the clock tick closer to the ceremony each second, another reminder that timing mattered. When systems move, they don't care about vows or flowers. They care about records. And mine were impeccable. The ceremony began at 4 p.m, just as the sun dipped low enough to soften the edges of everything. From my seat near the back of the garden, I watched Mark stand beneath the arch, smiling like a man who believed the worst was behind him. Lily sat in the front row, hands clasped, eyes darting nervously. My parents stood together, a perfect picture of unity. No one acknowledged me. That was fine. Halfway through the vows, my phone vibrated. I didn't look at it. I already knew. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. When the officiant pronounced the married, applause erupted. Music swelled. Guests rose, celebrating a future that had already begun to unravel. At the reception, champagne flowed. Toasts were made. Laughter rang out. My mother worked the room tirelessly, managing impressions with the skill of a seasoned performer. When she finally reached me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You couldn't just enjoy today," she said quietly. "I am," I replied, "in my own way." She leaned closer. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop. This is family." I met her gaze. "This is accountability." Her jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." "I already regretted trusting you," I said. "This is lighter." She recoiled as if struck, then straightened mask firmly back in place. "We'll talk later." "There is no later," I replied. Before she could respond, a man in a dark suit approached her. He spoke softly, but I saw the color drain from her face. She glanced around, panicked, then at me. "What is this?" she demanded. The man introduced himself. Federal Compliance Liaison. He requested a private conversation. The room seemed to tilt. Guests murmured. Mark looked over confusion, turning to alarm. Lily froze. My mother shot me a look filled with fury and disbelief. "You did this!" she hissed. "No," I said evenly. I stopped preventing it. They moved to a side room. My father followed, pale and silent. Mark trailed behind, anger and fear warring on his face. I remained where I was, untouched, glass in hand, heart steady. Rachel called minutes later. "They're interviewing them now." "Good," I replied. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said honestly, "I am." When my parents returned, the party had lost its rhythm. Conversations died when they passed. My mother's composure cracked visibly. My father avoided everyone's eyes. Mark looked like he might be sick. Lily approached me slowly. "What happens now?" she whispered. "That depends," I said, "on how honest they're willing to be." She swallowed. "And us?" I considered her carefully. "That depends on whether you keep pretending this was a surprise." She nodded faintly. As the night wound down, guests left early, the celebration drained of joy. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool air, listening to the river move steadily, indifferent to human drama. Behind me, my mother's voice rose sharp with accusation. I didn't turn around. I had done nothing cruel. I had done nothing reckless. I had simply stepped out of the way. And for the first time, the consequences belonged exactly where they should. The morning after the wedding felt unnaturally quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. Savannah's streets were washed clean by an early rain, the cobblestones slick and reflective, as if they were trying to show everyone a clearer version of themselves. I woke before my alarm, my body still tuned to crisis, even though for once the crisis was no longer mine to manage. My phone lay face down on the nightstand. I didn't touch it right away. When I finally did, there were 23 missed calls. My mother, my father, Mark, Lily. Unknown numbers. I recognized as lawyers, consultants, people who had never bothered to learn my name before yesterday. I listened to none of the voicemails. Instead, I made coffee and sat at the small table by the window watching delivery trucks roll past men doing their jobs without drama, without entitlement. The simplicity grounded me. At 9:15, Rachel called. "They're in damage control," she said, "but it's messy." "How bad?" I asked. "They didn't prepare," she replied. "They assumed proximity was protection. It isn't." I closed my eyes briefly. "What are they saying about me?" Rachel paused. "They're trying to suggest you acted independently, that you overstepped." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, not fear, but recognition. And the paper trail doesn't support that, she said, at all. That was the thing my mother had never understood. Charm works on people. Control works on children. But systems answer only to documentation. By noon, the story had begun circulating quietly among the right circles. Not headlines, whispers. Vendors suddenly cautious. Partners delaying calls. The kind of reputational erosion that doesn't explode but collapses inward, slowly, irreversibly. Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced, his suit-wrinkled eyes bloodshot. "You destroyed everything," he said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside, letting him in, not out of kindness but curiosity. He paced the living room like a trapped animal. "They're talking about freezing accounts, about oversight, about removing us." "Us?" I asked calmly. "Our family," he snapped. "No," I corrected, "the company." He rounded on me. "You knew this would happen." "Yes," I said. "And you let it," he said, incredulous. "I stopped preventing it," I replied. "There's a difference." He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, he looked less like the golden child, and more like what he was, a man who had never learned consequences until they arrived all at once. "They're blaming you," he muttered. "Of course they are," I said. He looked up, eyes glassy. "Can you fix it?" I studied him for a long moment. "I could have," I said, "before." And now he asked. Now I replied, "It's not my job." He left without another word. That afternoon, I received a formal notice, a request for testimony, not an accusation, a clarification. They wanted my account, my documentation, my explanation of how things had functioned for years. I agreed immediately, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth on record. That night, Lily called. "I didn't know it was this bad," she whispered. "You knew enough," I replied gently. She cried quietly. "What do I do now?" "That's up to you," I said. "Just don't ask me to lie." When the call ended, I felt something shift inside me, a subtle loosening. I wasn't holding anyone up anymore. And the silence that followed felt earned. The interview took place in a neutral office downtown, all glass walls and muted colors designed to discourage emotion. 2 investigators sat across from me, professional, calm, unhurried. A recorder blinked red on the table. They asked me to start from the beginning. So I did. I talked about my role, about the gradual transfer of responsibility, about the way family blurred boundaries until no one remembered where authority ended and obligation began. I spoke carefully, precisely, without embellishment. I didn't need drama. The facts were heavy enough. When they asked why I hadn't raised concerns earlier, I answered honestly, because I believed protecting them was my responsibility. And now one of them asked, "Now I believe protecting myself is," I replied. They nodded, not in agreement, in understanding. After the interview, I walked out into the afternoon sun feeling strangely light, not triumphant, free. My mother called that evening. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her voice raw, stripped of its usual polish. "I didn't do this to you," I said. "I stopped doing it for you." "You're my daughter," she said, as if that explained everything. "And I was your shield," I replied, "until you decided I wasn't worth including." She was silent for a long moment. "You think you've won," she said finally. I looked out at the street below, people moving forward, unburdened by our history. "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about ending something." She hung up without another word. Days passed, then weeks. The company entered a restructuring phase under external supervision. Mark was removed from leadership temporarily. My parents lost decision-making authority. Lily withdrew from the spotlight, retreating into a life that suddenly required accountability. And me, I was offered a position elsewhere. Higher pay, clear boundaries, no family strings. I accepted. On my last day in Savannah, I walked along the river at dusk, the same water flowing steadily indifferent to names and legacies. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she used to watch the current and say nothing. She had known this moment would come. She had just waited for me to be ready. As I turned away from the river and toward the life I had chosen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief. Alignment. The tables hadn't just turned. They had finally been set right. Leaving Savannah felt less like an escape and more like a quiet closing of a door I had been holding open for years. I packed my apartment without urgency, each item placed deliberately into boxes, as if I were teaching myself a new way to move through life. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation on the steps. My family didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask to be remembered. The drive north was long and flat highways stretching endlessly ahead. With every mile, the noise inside my head softened. I thought about how many decisions I had made out of obligation instead of desire, how often I had confused endurance with virtue. 2 weeks after I started my new position, the call came from Rachel. "It's official," she said. "They've concluded the first phase of findings." I closed my office door and sat down. "Tell me." "Your parents are being formally sanctioned," she said. "Civil penalties, mandatory oversight, and there's more." I waited. "The company is being split," she continued. "Assets restructured. Your grandmother's trust is being re-examined." My breath caught. "Re-examined how?" Rachel paused. "There's evidence suggesting your grandmother intended a different distribution than what was executed." I leaned back slowly. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," she interrupted gently, "that someone may have overridden her wishes." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Who?" I asked. "Your mother," Rachel said, "possibly with your father's consent." A familiar ache bloomed in my chest. Not shock, but confirmation. "What happens now?" "They're investigating the validity of the will," she replied. "And Claire, your name came up." I closed my eyes. "They found correspondence," Rachel continued. "Letters, notes, instructions your grandmother left with her attorney. You were meant to be included." Included. The word felt foreign, almost unreal. "Why now?" I asked. "Because once oversight began, everything was pulled into the light," she said, including what had been buried. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to savor the irony. Another part felt only sadness. Not for the money, for the effort it had taken to erase me. That evening, my father called. His voice was thin, stripped of authority. "We're being asked questions," he said, "about your grandmother." "I know," I replied. "She trusted you," he said quietly. "We should have listened." I let the silence stretch. "I don't need apologies," I said finally. "I needed honesty. A long time ago." He exhaled shakily. "Is there anything we can do?" "Yes," I said. "Tell the truth." He didn't answer right away. "Then your mother won't like that." "That's not my problem," I said. When the call ended, I felt something settle inside me. The past wasn't changing, but the narrative was. Weeks later, the formal notice arrived. The will was being contested, not by me, by the system itself. My grandmother's intentions were clear, documented, ignored, and now corrected. I didn't celebrate. I simply let justice take its course. The hearing was scheduled for early autumn in a courthouse that smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. I arrived alone wearing a simple navy dress, my posture calm, my expression unreadable. I wasn't there to perform grief or anger. I was there to witness. My parents sat together on the opposite side of the room. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but structurally, like the scaffolding that had once held them upright had been removed. My mother avoided my eyes. My father looked at me once, then down at his hands. Mark wasn't there. Lily sat a few rows back, pale and silent. The judge spoke clearly, methodically. Evidence was presented. Letters read aloud. My grandmother's voice echoed through the room in words she had written decades earlier, careful and unmistakable. She had seen everything. When the ruling came, it was almost anticlimactic. The will was partially invalidated. Assets redistributed according to original intent. Oversight remained. Penalties stood. And I was named officially as a rightful beneficiary. Not the largest share, but a deliberate one. My mother's composure finally broke. She pressed her lips together, hands trembling slightly. My father closed his eyes. I felt nothing explosive. No triumph, no satisfaction. Only a deep, steady sense of alignment. Afterward, Lily approached me outside the courthouse. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have spoken up." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. I found it fragile but real. "I hope you mean that," I said. "I do," she replied. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not offering it," I said. "I'm offering distance." She nodded, tears pooling but not falling. "That's fair." My parents didn't approach me. That too felt appropriate. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened a small envelope Rachel had given me. Inside was a copy of one of my grandmother's letters, the ink slightly faded but legible. "Claire has always understood responsibility," she had written. "I want her to understand freedom too." I pressed the letter to my chest and let the weight of it settle. The revenge everyone expected had never been loud. It hadn't required destruction. It had required truth. And truth once spoken had done the rest. I turned off the light, knowing the final chapters of this story were no longer about what I had survived. They were about what I chose next. The weeks after the hearing passed in a strange, weightless way, as if my life had finally slipped out from under a long shadow and didn't quite know how to behave in the sun. Nothing dramatic happened. No more court dates, no emergency calls, no late-night spirals of responsibility that weren't mine. Just space. Quiet. Choice. That was when the real work began. I noticed how often my body still braced for impact that never came. How I checked my phone compulsively, expecting another crisis to manage. How silence sometimes felt like failure instead of peace. These habits had been carved into me over decades. They didn't disappear just because the threat was gone. At work, my new role demanded clarity, but not sacrifice. Boundaries were written into contracts instead of assumed through guilt. When I logged off in the evening, no one expected me to carry the company home in my head. The first time I declined an after-hours request without explaining myself, my hands shook. Nothing happened. The world kept turning. One afternoon, I received a message from my father. I didn't open it right away. When I did, it was shorter than I expected. "Your mother is moving out of the house. The river property is being sold. I wanted you to hear it from me." I stared at the words for a long time. That house had been the center of gravity for our entire family. The place where every rule was enforced, every hierarchy reinforced. Watching it dissolve felt less like revenge and more like inevitability. I typed a reply, then deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I sent nothing. Not because I was cold. Because I was finished responding to changes I didn't cause. A week later, Lily reached out again. We met for coffee in a small cafe halfway between our cities. She looked different, quieter, less performed. "I'm in therapy," she said after we sat down. "Real therapy, not the kind Mom approved of." I nodded. "How is it?" "Uncomfortable," she admitted, "but honest." She stirred her drink nervously. I keep realizing how much of my life was built around staying small so she wouldn't feel threatened. I looked at her carefully. "Staying small doesn't protect anyone. It just postpones damage." She nodded slowly. "I know that now." We talked for over an hour. About childhood. About silence. About the ways families train you to confuse love with compliance. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. "I don't know what we are now," she said. "Neither do I replied. "But we don't have to decide today." That seemed to comfort her. As autumn deepened, the final paperwork from the estate arrived. My portion was transferred cleanly without ceremony. Enough to matter, not enough to define me. I used part of it to do something radical. Nothing. I didn't reinvest it immediately. I didn't use it to prove anything. I let it sit while I figured out who I was when I wasn't reacting. One evening, I took my grandmother's letter out again and read it slowly, this time without tears. She had trusted me with responsibility because I was capable. She had wanted me to choose freedom because I deserved it. For the first time, those two truths no longer felt like they were at odds. The family drama everyone had expected to explode ended instead with quiet consequences. Distance, restructuring, lives reshaped by accountability instead of control. There were no winners in the traditional sense, but there was balance. And as I stood at my window watching the city lights blink on one by one, I realized something with a clarity that surprised me. I wasn't healing to go back. I was healing to move forward. The final shift didn't come with a confrontation or a revelation. It came on an ordinary morning while I was standing in line for coffee, half listening to the conversation behind me. Two women, both older, were talking softly about a family argument, about being expected to show up, about being called selfish for setting limits. One of them sighed and said, "I just don't know when enough is enough." Something in me responded before my mind did. Enough is when staying costs more than leaving. I carried that sentence with me all day. In the afternoon, I received a formal notice that the company my family once controlled had completed its restructuring. New leadership, new oversight, a new name, the old legacy reduced to a footnote in someone else's quarterly report. I felt no urge to forward it to anyone. That chapter was closed. That evening, I cooked dinner slowly, intentionally, the way I never used to when life felt like a series of emergencies. I ate at the table instead of my desk. I turned off my phone. I let the quiet settle without trying to fill it. I thought about revenge, the word itself, how often it's misunderstood. People imagine revenge as destruction, as spectacle, as someone else's pain finally matching your own. But that wasn't what had happened here. What I had done was simpler, harder. I had withdrawn my labor from a system that exploited it. I had told the truth without decorating it. I had stopped compensating for other people's refusal to grow. The fallout wasn't something I orchestrated. It was something I allowed. A message arrived from my father later that night. "I hope you're happy," it read. "I don't mean that sarcastically. I just hope you are." I stared at the screen, then typed back, "I am learning to be." That was the most honest answer I could give. Before bed, I opened my laptop and drafted a resignation of a different kind. Not from a job or a role, but from an identity. I am no longer the fixer. I am no longer the buffer. I am no longer responsible for the emotional stability of people who refuse accountability. I saved the document not because anyone else would read it, but because I needed to see it written. As I turned off the light, I felt something settle into place. Not closure, integration. My past no longer felt like a weight dragging behind me. It felt like a foundation, solid, informative, no longer in control. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in it, in the quiet endurance, in the way responsibility was handed to you instead of respect, know this. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to let systems collapse that only stood because you held them up. You are allowed to choose yourself without proving anyone else wrong. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't taking something back. It's finally letting go. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video. If it spoke to your experience, subscribe for more stories about truth boundaries and reclaiming your life. Because the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to hold, you don't just survive. You begin again.